What's up guys, my name is Calvin Wiley and welcome to my YouTube channel. If you are new, if you could please hit that subscribe button and also hit the bell icon to turn on post notifications. That way you're alerted every time that I post a new video. So in today's video, I'm going to be going over basic care for millipedes. I'm going to be displaying two species in this video. I'm primarily going to be focusing on Archispirostreptus gigas, which is the giant African millipede. Although there's many different species of millipedes in the world, most species pretty much have the same exact care and requirements. So this video is basically going to be covering just general care and information, which will pretty much provide you with all the information that you need to be able to take care of your millipede. So without further ado, let's just get right into the video. So in my hand are two smoky oak millipedes, Narcissus gordanus. This species is commonly found in southeastern states of the US. In my opinion, they're a pretty fairly decent sized millipede, not too small, and they're not also massive, just decent size. Now, this species is not going to be my primary focus of today's video. The star of the video, which I will get out in just 1 second, is going to be today's primary focus, where I'm going to give general care and also build an enclosure. And the species that I'm referring to is none other than Archispirostreptus gigas, which is the giant African millipede. She's just a little camera shy, as you can see. She's in a spiral. Millipedes will do this as protection against predators. They'll actually tuck their head in, which is pretty much their most important part. Oh, here she comes. She's unraveling herself. Now, this species of millipede is native to East Africa, where it spends most of its time underground, keeping cool from the heat. They'll typically hide under natural debris such as logs, rocks, leaf litter, etc. Now, the giant African millipede, as you can see, has many legs. The number of legs vary depending on where it's at and its lifespan. So at full length, at maximum size, the giant African millipede typically has about 400 legs in total. Now, the legs will always change and increase as the millipede molts. So once the millipede, not just this millipede, but all millipedes in general, all species of millipedes, once a millipede molts, it will grow a bunch of new pair of legs, and then it'll also grow new body segments, which are these lines right here, these segmented lines that basically divide the exoskeleton into different parts. Now, a good rule of thumb, if you're ever confused on a centipede versus a millipede and trying to identify one, you can always look at the legs. So centipedes, which I don't have one in my hand right now, but you could always do a quick Google search, will have one pair of legs per body segment. Millipedes, which I am currently holding right now so I can show you, have two pair of legs per body segment. So as you can see, there's two pair of legs on each segment of its exoskeleton. So you have two here, two here, two here, two here, etc, etc, etc. So that's a good rule of thumb in trying to identify centipedes versus millipedes. Now, this species of millipede, which just so happens to be the largest species on the planet, can reach a maximum size of about 13 to 15 inches when it's fully grown. Not only that, but they can also live to about a decade in total. So this species living a whopping 10 years in captivity if kept well and under the right conditions. Now, as you saw in the beginning of the video when I first brought her out to introduce her to you guys, she was in a defensive spiral, and that's what most millipedes, especially this one, will typically do. They will coil up into a spiral where they protect their head, which is their most important part. That's kind of where all the functioning happens. That's where the brain is located, the eyes, the mouth, all the good stuff. Now the second line of defense that they will do after they go into a spiral is they'll actually secrete a toxic substance known as repugnatorial fluid, which is basically this chemical that's comprised of a toxin known as hydrogen cyanide. Now this is not really too much to worry about unless you ingest it. If it gets on your skin, it'll just leave your skin a little discolored for just a few days. Just make sure you wash your hands and don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth. But because, you know, it is a poison, you could get sick. And that kind of brings in my next talking point that I wanted to say real quick about millipedes. So many species of millipedes are poisonous. They contain toxins in them. The main one mostly is hydrogen cyanide. Centipedes, however, are not poisonous, but are venomous. So, you know, that is a good rule of thumb. You know, venom has to be injected. Venom's a protein. You can, you know, if you want to, you could ingest venom. Your stomach acids could break it down, but poison, that is a no-no. You do not want to ingest that. So that's the second thing I wanted to talk about. Millipedes typically are poisonous. Centipedes are venomous. Here's a quick close-up of her legs if you wanted to see. The legs almost feel like toothbrush bristles, if that makes any sense. They can move their legs independently, as you can see. Here's a quick close-up of her head. You can see their little tiny antennas moving. You can also see their eyes. One thing I wanted to show you guys are the little mites that typically live on giant African millipedes. There's one right there where my index finger is pointed. It's super tiny, you might not even see it, but it looks like a dot. I'll zoom in. Right there. So that's a tiny little mite, and there are several more that inhabit her body. These mites are nothing to worry about. These mites actually have like a symbiotic relationship with the giant African millipede. So the mites are actually its cleanup crew. They'll feed on bacteria and other dead things that may be growing on the giant African millipede, whether it be mold or other types of bacterial substances. So the millipede basically gives them protection by living on its body while the mites get free food. So it's almost a little trade-off, cleaning for housing. I'll just let her roam around on the table for a little bit as I continue talking. But yeah, so what I'm about to do now is basically show you guys a basic enclosure that you can make for your millipede, whether you have one millipede or many millipedes. You can keep as many as you want in an enclosure, typically, just as long as there's enough space and plenty of food for them. So what I'm going to show you guys now is how to go about building an enclosure. Alright, so the first thing is to get an enclosure for your millipede to be housed in. I typically like to use terrariums, but you can also use like shoe boxes or plastic like storage bins, anything like that, like Tupperware containers work just fine. Just make sure that the lid has air holes in it for ventilation for your millipede to be able to breathe. Now the next thing that you're going to need is some substrate that is suitable for your millipede. If you guys aren't familiar with keeping millipedes already, millipedes will not only live in the substrate that you have for them, they'll also feed off of it too. The substrate has a lot of nutrients, vitamins, minerals for them to be able to live and grow healthy. So if you guys don't already have millipede substrate, it's actually very easy and readily available online to purchase. Just do a Google search, just type in millipede substrate for sale, and I'm sure you will find several websites offering it. The next thing that doesn't really need to be put in, but I typically, in my preference, I believe it works very well, especially for breeding millipedes, and that is flake soil. Now, this is flake soil that you can, again, buy off of online. Just type in flake soil for sale, and I'm sure you could find some. But this is basically aged, fermented hardwood that has been just basically sitting for a very long time and has developed a lot of nutrients that will be vital for your millipede's growth. So I know a lot of people just typically use millipede substrate. I like to do a mixture, and so millipede substrate and flake soil, in my opinion, it works better than just using just plain old millipede substrate. But you know, you can experiment on what you want to use, but this is what I'm going to be using for the video. Alright, so first things first, I'm just going to open the millipede substrate, and I'm going to dump it all into the enclosure. Alright. Mix it all in there. Now, as you can see, this substrate has a lot of leaves in it, and that is because millipedes are detritivores, which means that they feed on dead organic matter, such as dead plant material, and so dead leaves will make up part of their diet. And you can also buy dead hard leaves online as well, if you were wondering. Alright, now that that's all mixed in there, we are now going to add the second substrate, which will be the flake soil. And I'm not going to add the whole entire bag. I will add a decent amount though. That should be good. And then I'm just going to mix it in with the already millipede substrate that we have in there. Now you should have about at least, I'd say 3 to 4, 5 inches at most of substrate, and that is because depending on your millipede, I don't know where it's at in its life, but millipedes need to molt just like all arthropods, and what millipedes will do is they'll actually bury themselves underground, and then they will molt once they are fully submerged. So if there's not enough substrate in your enclosure, it'll be very hard for your millipede to successfully molt. So make sure there is a decent amount of substrate in there. Now, I know that I've already shown 2 substrates that we're going to be using, which was the millipede substrate and the flake soil substrate. I'm just going to add a little bit of reptisoil, which is this stuff right here. It's basically a blend of peat moss, soil, sand, and also carbon. Now, again, this is another just preference. I like to go above and beyond when it comes to substrate for millipedes because when breeding them, I believe that substrate really defines the success rate and also how prolific a millipede is going to be. So I like to put as much good stuff in the substrate as I can. But this is just reptisoil. This is basically a blend of peat moss, soil, sand, and also carbon. I'm only going to put a little bit in there to mix it. So in total, we'll have millipede substrate, flake soil, and reptisoil. Alright, so let me just go and add the reptisoil now. Alright, now I'm going to mix it all in there. So millipedes, like I said, will feed on the substrate that they live in. It's very nutritious for them. They'll also eat other food as well, which I will explain in just a little bit, but this is typically what they will consume. And like I said earlier, millipedes will also feed on leaves. So these are just dried oak leaves. And so what I like to do, I know there's leaves in there already, but like I said, I like to go a little above and beyond. I'm a bit crazy when it comes to the substrate. I'll basically just crush them with my hands and just kind of sprinkle them both on top, and then I will also submerge some under the substrate as well. And so they'll consume the leaves that are resting at the surface of the substrate, and then as well as the leaves that are underneath the soil as well. So this is basically what it's gonna look like. I mean, it's gonna look messy, don't worry. It's supposed to. It looks just like outside, how outside would look in the forest and wooded areas. But yeah, typically just like that. So nothing but a whole bunch of substrate and leaves spread out in a chaotic order. So going back to what I was saying about millipedes having to go underground to molt, a good way to ensure that your millipede has a successful molt is supplying them with a supplement. This is a calcium supplement that is typically used for hermit crabs, but you can also use this for millipedes as well. It will help them and aiding them in having successful molts. So what you're gonna do is you're just gonna take the powder and you're just literally gonna just sprinkle it in the substrate. I mean, you could go like that too if you want. But as they feed on the substrate, they will also be consuming the calcium supplement that you mixed in there for them. And then of course you're just going to mix it and evenly distribute it. Now if you don't have a calcium supplement in a powder form, what you can buy are cuttlefish bones, which usually they sell to hermit crabs. It's basically I don't know, squid anatomy or cephalopod anatomy I should say, but it's basically the bone in the cuttlefish. It's a good calcium source that the millipede will actually gnaw on if you cannot find your your calcium supplement in a powder form. But either one works. So alright, now the next step is to just spray down your enclosure, and you're going to do that with, I recommend filtered water instead of using tap water, but you always want to make sure, number one rule, always want to make sure when keeping millipedes that your substrate is moist. It doesn't have to be like saturated and like just pooling with water, but make sure it is moist at all times, because millipedes suffer from drying out, or also known as desiccation, where they will pretty much die due to a lack of moisture. So always make sure your substrate is moist both on the surface and also underneath. A good way to maintain humidity to ensure that your substrate stays moist all the time is to keep a heating pad. Now typically, you're gonna use the heating pad under most enclosures, but for keeping millipedes, you're gonna want to basically, let me take my tripod so you can see. You're going to place the heating pad and stick it to the side of the enclosure. Either side, doesn't, either here, it doesn't matter. And the reason for that is because if you keep it underneath of the enclosure, millipedes, like I said earlier in the video, they like to hide and bury themselves underground, and if you keep the heating pad under there, they're basically going to get cooked and may possibly die. So keeping the heating pad on the side of the enclosure is a good rule of thumb, and not only will it keep the humidity up, it'll also give your millipede some good heat. They typically will do well when they're kept warm, and will not be super sluggish if kept cold. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. So the next thing that we're going to do is basically just put, well, this is Okay, you don't have to do this. You don't have to do this at all. I'm just gonna put a dish, put any dish of some sort, just to put food in. Now you can put the food directly on the substrate. Me, I just like to put in the dish because it's easier to clean if they don't eat all of it. And also sometimes the food, if you just keep it in the substrate, it could go moldy. So this just makes it easier to just, you know, pick up, clean out, wash out, whatever, and put new food in, instead of picking through the substrate and finding moldy food, which then could cause mold to grow in your substrate, which will not be good for the millipede. So whatever you want to do, it's all a preference. Now the food that you're going to be feeding your millipede, you can't go wrong with organic cucumber. This is actually a cucumber that my dad organically grown in his garden in the backyard, so I'm going to be using this for the video. I typically always feed millipedes cucumbers. If I don't have any readily available, I'll feed them slices of apples, but yeah, just sliced cucumber always does the trick. I usually don't mix it up because, like I said, they'll feed on the substrate as well as other food sources, and that other food source I like to use are cucumbers. Alright, so I just chopped the cucumber up. I'm just going to put 2 slices in there. Now the second thing that you're going to give your millipede for food are fish flakes. This is just a good source of protein for your millipede to be able to take. You know, you're not going to be feeding them meats, but you can feed them fish flakes, which is an excellent protein source for them. So what you can do is just sprinkle it on your on the food that you already have for them, or what you can do is just take it and kind of just spread it around the enclosure, almost like how I did with the calcium supplement. So let me just go and do that right now. Just like that. Doesn't have to look pretty, and if some gets in, it's whatever, you know, spread it around. Also, I'm not going to do this because my substrate is usually always maintained and kept moist, but if you're having a hard time keeping humidity in and keeping the substrate moist, not only can you put the heating pad on the side of the enclosure, you can also add a small water dish into the enclosure as well. Just get a small water dish, and that'll actually kind of, you know, humidify, or not humidify, but kind of steam up the enclosure a little bit with the water dwelling in there and the cup. So you can do that as well to try to get the enclosure moist if you're having a hard time. And then lastly, this is just all for aesthetic purposes. Let me just move the enclosure a little bit so you can see. I'm just going to add a piece of cork bark. Sometimes a millipede will hide underneath of things. Usually they'll just hide under the substrate just in random spots, but sometimes they'll might rest. Can't even talk. They might rest underneath of a piece of something, a piece of cork, piece of rock, whatever. And lastly, all we're gonna add to the enclosure is our millipede, or if you have millipedes, you can add them all to the enclosure. Now, as far as breeding, everything I've shown you, you shouldn't have any problems with breeding your millipedes. There's really nothing you can physically do other than just give them, you know, just feed them and give them proper, suitable substrate, and they'll just do their thing. Sometimes you'll find little eggs hidden in the substrate. Most of the times you will just see the little babies, you know, that have already hatched. They're super tiny, super small, super cute, and you know, same thing with them. Just keep them in the substrate. You don't have to do anything different with them. Just keep them as you keep the adults. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all there is to it. But yeah, if you guys, I didn't get a chance to say it, but if you guys need any sort of products, any sort of substrate, pretty much anything that I posted in today's video, you could all find on, well, not everything, but you can find a lot of the stuff in my description, where I left links to Amazon where you can actually purchase stuff such as substrate and enclosures, anything like that. So Let me just put her back into her new enclosure. For those who don't know, my girlfriend actually got this for me for my birthday. This particular Giant African Millipede. And I can honestly say it is the best gift that any human being has ever given me. So thank you again, sweetie, for granting me this beautiful, beautiful animal. There she goes, hiding under the cork bark that I provided her. Like I said, they will hide underground, but they will also hide under objects as well if you give them to them. Well, that is going to conclude today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I can honestly say this was one of my favorite videos making. I don't know why, I just had a fun time just building the enclosure from scratch and also giving you guys the information that is needed to have your millipede live and thrive in a healthy environment. But yeah, I had a whole lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys don't already, follow me on Instagram. My Instagram name is my name. It's at Kelvin Wiley. So if you could head over there now and please follow me on there, that'd be really appreciated. If you guys don't already follow me on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and also hit the bell icon to turn on post notifications. That way you're alerted every time that I post a new video. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, if you could please leave a like and a comment, I'd really appreciate that a whole lot. Yeah, so again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.